very much, Madam Deputy President, and I rise to make a contribution to the Agricultural and Veterinary Chemicals Legislation Amendment Operational Efficiency Bill 2017. And Madam Deputy President, I support initiatives to reduce the regulatory burden for our primary producers, providing it's taking into account the primary purpose of the APVMA, which, as we know, is to protect the health and safety of people, animals and the environment by ensuring chemical products are safe. So yes, this is a very important regulator. It has very important function. All the more reason why the government of the day should be respectful of its operations. And I'll talk about later in my contribution the way in which this government has been utterly dismissive of the importance of this authority. Now, Labor is supporting this bill, but I note that this legislation should have been implemented 3 years ago. The coalition government has dragged its feet on agricultural reform, just like they've dragged their feet on banking reform, on payday lending, consumer protections and in relation to superannuation. Now, Madam Deputy President, what this bill seeks to do is to make minor and technical amendments to the following acts: the Agricultural and Veterinary Chemicals Administration Act 1992, the Agricultural and Veterinary Chemicals Code Act 1994, the Agricultural and Veterinary Chemical Products Collection of Levy Act 1994, and the explanatory memorandum states that the amendments will realise operational efficiencies, reduce unnecessary regulation, clarify ambiguities and remove redundant provisions. Now, enacting these changes, the bill reduces the regulatory burden on industry by simplifying reporting requirements for annual returns, reduces the administrative burden on the APVMA and industry by increasing the flexibility of the APVMA to manage errors in an application at the preliminary assessment stage, reduces the regulatory burden by enabling the APVMA to grant part of a variation application under Section 27 of the Schedule to the Code Act, the AgVet Code, enables a person to apply to vary the relevant particulars or conditions of a label approval that is suspended to the extent that the variation relates to the grounds for suspension. It establishes civil pecuniary penalties for contraventions of provisions relating to providing false or misleading information in the AgVet Code and the Administration Act. It amends the notification requirements in Section 8E of the AgVet Code so that the APVMA and the FSA-NZ will have the flexibility to agree on appropriate timeframes for notifications. It amends the definition of expiry date in the AgVet Code to mean that the date after which a chemical product must not be used, and makes minor and technical amendments to the Administration Act and the AgVet Code, including the repeal of redundant provisions. Now, as I said in my opening comments, the government has been too slow to implement the necessary reforms in this space. Reforms which were expected from industry stakeholders following the introduction of the significant legislative reforms introduced by the Labor government in 2013 to improve the efficiency of the APVMA. Despite the National Party selling themselves as the champions of farmers, it's often Labor who achieves the results. Labor's reforms saw promising signs of increased performance at the APVMA emerge in 2016. The timeframe performance for assessing pesticide applications, statutory timeframes, reached 83% in the 2016 September quarter. However, with the ongoing negative impact on the APVMA due to the forced relocation by the then Turnbull government and currently supported by the Morrison government, these promising signs have been devastated, I note Senator Ruskin's comments earlier about the importance of the work of the APVMA, not only for Australians but also in terms of our international reputation, and that just throws into stark relief the irresponsibility in relation to the relocation of the APVMA. The APVMA only achieved 30% of its work within statutory timeframes for crop protection in the March 2017 quarter, 24% in the June quarter and 36% in the September quarter 2017. Now, the recent performance figures have improved but are still not at the height of the timeframes reached in the 2016 September quarter. Now, we know that industry stakeholders are seeking to have this bill passed as soon as possible, but I note that this bill could have been put forward much earlier than the 25th of October 2017. It's interesting that Senator Ruston made the comment that these reforms are extremely urgent. Well, if you wouldn't know it in relation to the timeframes that they've been following in respect of these reforms. And further, since the election of the coalition government, it's failed to identify or deliver any legislative reform options that would result in any quantifiable ongoing efficiency dividend for the regulator. The former Agricultural Minister, Mr Joyce, has been all talk and no action on ensuring that further legislative operational efficacies are implemented. And an example of the all talk and no action is the 2015 failed agricultural white paper that indicated that the government would further streamline the approval of agricultural and veterinary chemicals by reducing industry and user costs by around $68 million to improve timely access to productivity-enhancing chemicals while still ensuring appropriate safeguards. So once again, we see that this is proof of a government that's big on media releases and discussion papers and incredibly slow to act. It just brings to mind the continuous policy failures of the National Party in relation to the constituency which they claim to represent. We've seen failures on the part of the National Party in respect of climate policy, in respect of the rollout of the NBN, particularly for rural areas, when it comes to irrigation policy, when it comes to the Northern Australia infrastructure facility and Northern Australia development, when it comes to rural health. And we know that people in rural Australia suffer some of the worst outcomes when it comes to health, and yet we see this government not lifting a finger to assist. And another recent policy failure has been in respect of the creation of the Regional Investment Corporation, a $28 million organisation for which there is no policy rationale. In fact, it duplicates many of the functions of the state rural adjustment authorities. It's going to be located in Orange, which is a state seat that the National Party lost, coincidentally. And we know that from the last estimates that it's currently administering around 4 loans. This is a massive waste of taxpayer funding and another example of the failure of the National Party to properly represent people in rural Australia. Just coming back to this bill, it does consist of the necessary minor technical amendments to assist with streamlining the APVMA operations. Such amendments are to be expected following the introduction of the significant legislative reforms introduced by Labor in 2013 to improve the efficiency of the APVMA. The amendments presented in the bill by the current government are 3 years later than what was required. Taking 3 years to implement necessary amendments is unacceptable. Now, this unnecessary delay highlights the lack of urgency and the focus of the then Deputy Prime Minister and his previous department, which had been distracted by the forced relocation to the member for New England's own electorate. However, criticism of the department is not warranted because they have had to manage a difficult minister with very different priorities. Since deciding to relocate the regulator to Armidale in his own electorate, the former Agricultural Minister and Deputy Prime Minister has failed to identify or deliver any legislative reform options that would result in any quantifiable ongoing efficiency dividend for the regulator. Agricultural chemicals are a cost-effective, efficient, essential and sustainable option for farmers to use to control pests, weeds and diseases, and as such represent a core input for modern farming systems. A streamlined, effective regulator capable of delivering more timely risk assessments, approvals and registrations is essential. Now, if we go back to the beginning, to when the then Deputy Prime Minister announced his forced relocation of the APVMA to his own electorate, he did so without any understanding of what the impact would be on the authority, or if he did understand it, was with callous disregard for the impact. And also appears on the face of it that he seemed not to actually understand what the APVMA actually does. On the 10th of February 2016, Minister Joyce actually said, and I quote, "Moving the APVMA would allow it to have a closer interaction with the people who actually use agricultural and veterinary chemicals, as well as build a centre of excellence in the research of agricultural issues." The APVMA does not actually deal directly with farmers, and it does not test the products. The talk of the Centre of Excellence is just hollow words when there's no actual plan as to what an agricultural centre of excellence would actually look like. Minister Joyce has said that the proposal to relocate the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority to Armidale will go through the process of an independent cost-benefit risk analysis, which would then be looked at further by the government. Now, a cost-benefit was undertaken and it gave a damning assessment of the relocation, stating that, firstly, the estimated economic cost of $23.19 million excludes any potential cost to industry arising from the risks to the agricultural sector, the chemical industry or Australia's trading reputation. Whilst these risks are real, their impacts and consequences are based on a probability of an event occurring, and as such, in adopting the principle of conservatism, they've been excluded. Secondly, to effectively undertake the move of the APVMA and adopt relevant risk mitigation strategies, the cash cost to the government could be significantly higher than the estimated economic cost of $23.19 million. The most significant risk identified through the analysis relates to the ability of the APVMA to relocate or to recruit and replace key APVMA executive, management and technical assessment staff within the first 2 years of relocation. Critically, the loss of technical assessment staff, regulatory scientists, has the potential to seriously disrupt the ability of the APVMA to successfully fulfil its purpose and achieve its objectives in the short and medium term. Further, a key concern for stakeholders in relation to the relocation of the APVMA to Armidale is the impact that the relocation may have on the approval of new chemicals for use. Stakeholders are concerned that delays to the approval of new chemicals will arise as a result of the loss of staff, the disruption to business and/or the impact of the APVMA's current reform agenda. The analysis found that if poorly executed, the economic costs of moving the APVMA could therefore be considerably higher than identified in the cost-benefit analysis. Based on conservative estimates of a 1-year delay in the approval of new products, the potential impact on the agricultural sector for crops alone could be between $64 million and $193 million per annum. The risks to the ag-vet chemical industry associated with moving the APVMA are also significant, with a one-year delay in the approval of new chemicals potentially impacting industry to the value of between $0.8 million and $2.7 million per annum in terms of lost revenues. Sadly, the cost benefit was totally ignored by the then Deputy Prime Minister, and now the risks identified are actual realities. But it wasn't only the cost benefit analysis that warned the then Deputy Prime Minister of his ill-considered pork barrel. The former CEO, Karina Arthi, stressed the negative impact the relocation would have on the authority, writing in a letter to Minister Joyce on the 31st of July 2015, stating, and I quote, "Potential loss of regulatory scientists. The most significant challenge highlighted by the outcomes of the staff survey is that around 3/4 of regulatory scientists probably would not move if the APVMA is relocated. Only 7 regulatory scientists have indicated a willingness to move. Even if all the scientists who've indicated that they may consider moving agree to move, there would only be 19 regulatory scientists with knowledge of how to assess registration applications or undertaking and underlying scientific assessments." The letter from Ms Arthi goes on to talk about the fact that regulatory scientists have highly specialised skills that are in short supply in Australia. And even under the current situation back in 2015, the APVMA found it hard to recruit appropriate regulatory scientists. So again, this is now a reality, and the APVMA has recently indicated in its business model that the construction of the new business models for Armidale should be regarded as a high priority and delivered by a full-time team headed by a senior executive with a direct reporting line to the CEO. In order to insulate the team from the day-to-day and operational pressures of a busy regulator, the team should be separated from the ongoing business and include staff located in Armidale. Arrangements could also be made to facilitate the transfer of staff who wish to relocate to Armidale into this team, so they have opportunities to contribute to the construction of the new model and the training of new staff. The maintenance of a sufficient internal scientific capability will require vigorous efforts to retain and recruit appropriately skilled regulatory scientists. This will require active management of staff relocations, including incentives for staff to relocate and an accelerated recruitment program. The APVMA should also consider targeting staff from overseas pesticide and veterinary chemical regulators, either on permanent appointment or on secondment. Talk about remote working may provide a means of retaining some more experienced staff. However, only some of the functions currently performed are suitable for remote working, and it's highly unlikely that this would be a long-term viable arrangement for the bulk of the staff involved in the function. So the APVMA is, of course, consumed with the issues associated with this forced relocation. I also note that there's been a recent report of the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee this month in relation to the independence of regulatory decisions made by the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. And this committee report has expressed the concern about the manner in which the APVMA was relocated, its impact on the availability of staff expertise, the flow-on effects for farmers across Australia who require timely and certain access to pesticides and veterinary medicines. And the committee pointed to the fact that despite the best efforts of the authority, they had no other option than to retain the satellite office in Canberra. So this is an indictment of the whole move. So in conclusion, Labor will support this bill today. We'll support it because while those opposite drag their feet in standing up for rural and regional communities that they purport to represent, Labor will stand up. Labor is listening and delivering for regional and rural communities through Senate inquiries into the dairy industry, the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund and insurance policy prices, through investment in renewable energy, through a review of free trade agreement protocols to expedite opportunities for our produce growers, and in Queensland through state Labor initiatives such as building our regions, the wild dog cluster fencing. Labor will continue to listen to regional and rural communities.
Thank you, Senator.